Hi everyone, welcome to Google Cloud Onboard GCP Fundamentals. This is the last day of 3 days of courses. On the first day, we talked about core infrastructure. On the second day, we talked about big data and machine learning. Today, we're going to focus on what you're going to build, application development on GCP. Thank you so much for the feedback over the last couple of days and participating in the Q&A. No matter where you're working from, you're not alone. Right now, there are thousands of other people joining you in this live session. The feedback that you've provided, we have worked into the last couple of days as well. So we made some changes yesterday, extending the hands-on lab session, as well as adding additional moderators into the live Q&A to make sure that you get your questions answered. We're also going to make a few changes today as well. So again, we're going to extend the hands-on lab, but also spend a little bit more time upfront talking about the QuickLabs interface to make sure that you understand how to set up your account and how to use QuickLabs. Remember that you do not have to follow along during the hands-on lab session. The recording will be available in a couple of days, and you can follow along at your own pace, pausing as required in order to catch up. In addition, please look out for the email that will be sent to you in the next couple of days. If you do the Essentials Quest, the first step in the Essentials Quest, we will give you 30 days of additional access to QuickLabs. So again, you can do these labs at your own pace and at your own leisure, as well as try out any of the other labs that are available. So how do we participate today? So there are two icons you'll see on your screen. There's a home button, which will let you know the agenda for today. So we're going to do an introduction to application development. We're going to talk about storage and monitoring. And then we're going to talk about containers, App Engine, and Cloud Run, followed by the hands-on lab as discussed. There's also a Q&A button. Please ask questions and give us feedback on the session. We will try to respond as quickly as possible. And of course, let's keep this as a conversation. So if you see a question that you have the answer to, please chime in and answer the question. And remember that this is about building a community as well as learning about Google Cloud Platform. There are multiple ways to learn. This is just the beginning of your journey. There are online references, there are online courses. Again, please check your email in a few days, and we'll have some special offers available to you for those of you that have registered. It's also not too late to register. So if you have friends or colleagues that are interested in developing applications on Google Cloud Platform, please forward that link to them. We also have a hashtag Google Cloud Onboard. Use that in your social media. We'll be monitoring that and trying to respond to that as well. So as I said, there are multiple ways to learn. One of the ways that we learn, a lot of people have learned internally and externally, is through this book, Google Cloud Platform in Action. This book was written by JJ Gewax, and we are lucky enough to have JJ here with us in the studio today. JJ, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So JJ, you've been with Google for over 9 years across a number of roles, internal engineering as well as external engineering around Google Cloud Platform.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please let us know a little bit about how we thought about technology internally and how we've then started to incorporate that into Google Cloud Platform?
Oh, absolutely. So we originally started thinking about development using effectively containers, right? We had a lot of compute capacity and storage capacity when we started thinking about how to chop that up into smaller pieces over and over. Over the years, we've seen it to be a really, really valuable way of managing compute resources. And so a few years back, we decided to open source some of that work with Kubernetes. Similarly, we have the same kind of situation with storage, right? We have a lot of bytes to store. Gmail has to put your emails somewhere. And so we've managed to come up with some really interesting storage paradigms, things like Bigtable, which has been around for quite some time. We use it for our search storage. Spanner, which is used for quite a few different storage systems. And Google Cloud Storage, or the equivalent internal blob store, which is sort of for storing arbitrary chunks of bytes. We realize these things are not just useful for Googlers. They actually are pretty useful for people who don't work at Google. Surprise. And so over the years, we've worked, as part of Google Cloud Platform to externalize these things, to take these same storage paradigms, these same computing paradigms, and make sure they're available to the rest of the world. And so that's kind of what we've spent the last, I don't know, since 2012 or so, and even before that with App Engine that started back in 2008. We've been doing this for over 10 years now and working on externalizing this, and then before that, another 10 years before that on building these things out. So quite a lot of experience in that area.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I think a few years ago, whenever we would talk about Google and our infrastructure that we have available, we used to talk a lot about Google scale, like Google scale problems, right? So we have 8 products with over 1 billion users, but it's no longer now just Google scale, right? Everybody is having these sorts of large data problems and being able to respond quickly to their consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because even if you don't have scale problems today, or even Google scale problems today, it's likely that you'll have them in the future. And it's terrible if you'll be a victim of your own success, where you spend all this time building your app and it's so popular that it falls over. And that's not exactly the scenario we want. And so by using any kind of a public cloud service that's out there, and Google happens to be particularly good in this area, you can build something that even if you don't need to have that scale today, you can be prepared for it in the future. I'd also argue that it's not just a scale problem. There's other functionality problems that are very difficult for you to solve on your own, and some of these cloud services have done it for you. So for example, it used to be if you wanted to see if there were any faces in a picture, right, you would have to spin up a team of 5 engineers to work on some machine learning algorithm, train a model, find all the data, do a whole lot of work. And now it's kind of like you make a single call to the Cloud Vision API. So it's a lot easier, not just in scale, but also in functionality. So we're working on saving time for people building applications that are worried about scale overall, but also worried about getting some of these more complicated functionality pieces built into their system without having to spin up a research team from with a bunch of PhDs. So that can save a lot of time and cost overall.
Yeah, I mean, I think like inside of Google, we talk a lot about sort of toil, right? And how we're trying to get rid of toil from our developers so they can focus on our users and focus on the differentiation, the application that they're trying to build.
Yep.
As we look at that, as we look at sort of focusing on our users and what's next, where do you see things moving forward? So as we move from infrastructure, and now today we're going to talk a lot about things like containerization and the automation of that containerization. What's next? What should developers be focusing on?
So there's a lot of interesting stuff that we're building right now. One of the cool things is recommendations, coming up with ways that we can suggest as Google, here's how you should shape and arrange your system. I would think that there's quite a lot of just tinkering and development that's sort of left to do with a lot of the new services that are coming out. But overall, I suspect that we're going to see a lot more, large workloads coming out. We have, containers are great for small individual pieces, but they're also good for larger pieces. It's just a container takes up more of a piece of hardware. And I suspect in particular with the enterprise systems out there, we're going to start to see people shifting from lots of little teeny tiny microservices, finding that they actually scale one-to-one with each other, and deciding to merge those two together. And the reason I say this is we're actually having that experience at Google, where we have a lot of containers that are running every day inside Borg, which is our sort of version of Kubernetes. That Kubernetes is based off of in principle. And we're seeing those Borg services shift to from lots of little small ones to some larger ones, because they actually turn out to be more efficient if the things scale together and solve a single problem together. And so overall, I suspect we're going to go a little bit in that direction. But to be honest, the future still holds a whole bunch of stuff we can't predict. So who knows?
Right. And I think that's one of the great things is sometimes whenever we look at things just from a Google perspective, it's not as efficient for some of our external customers. So I think with Google Cloud, what we see is we see a lot of feedback coming from those customers and from those partners and from the open source community, and specifically around Kubernetes, around how we might approach some of these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just about efficiency and scale and all of the stuff that looks good on pretty graphs. There's I don't want to come back to that functionality thing again, because we're not just trying to save you time on managing toil, that repetitive cleanup work and maintenance work. We're also trying to make it easier for you to build stuff. And so there are quite a lot of features that we had inside Google that didn't make any sense for a public service, and so we got rid of them. There were also a lot of features that we just didn't have internally because we had no use for them, but we found that people who were not Googlers needed these things. For example, signed URLs on cloud storage. We really wanted the ability to let people expose, the permission to upload a single file to a single bucket rather than just opening their bucket to the world and then getting a giant bill at the end of the month. Googlers, we don't pay the bills. Like, it doesn't work that way. And so, we didn't really care about that feature, but we went and built it because people who don't work at Google do care about that feature. So I think that yes, we're obviously trying to make things more efficient. We're trying to make them scale better. We're trying to make them more cost effective, but we're also trying to make it easier to do stuff so that you don't have to build it yourself. And if enough people have the same problem, we're listening, and we're going to go and eventually build it for you so that you don't have to continue rolling in your own thing and reinventing the wheel over and over.
Right. So one of the things that you had on an internal presentation, and I've stolen this a couple of times since then already, which is you wanted to make the easy things awesome and the difficult things possible. And actually, you'll see some of that today in the third module where we're talking about containers and App Engine and Cloud Run. Can you talk about that approach and maybe work that into what you're doing today at NBU?
Absolutely. So I actually don't work on cloud anymore. I switched to working on the Next Billion Users initiative, but I'm still maintaining my role as as part of this thing called AIP.dev. It's sort of the rules for how Google does API design, and we're involving lots of other companies and lots of other people. It's an interesting undertaking because we're trying to define rules that work and share them with the world. As part of my work on NBU, I'm working on this thing called Mojaloop, which is in partnership with the Gates Foundation and others, to design APIs for people who are trying to send remittances and money abroad, and help make it easier to move money between places, easier and safer. And so it's an interesting direction we're going, but I haven't left cloud entirely. Still doing this API design work as well.
All right. So last question. Any advice? We have a broad range of people, people who are just getting started with application development, people with years of experience. Any specific things that you would recommend that they start doing on their journey?
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite thing is just to tinker. You're going to have to play with things to figure out how they work and how to use them. Everybody has to make those mistakes and figure out, that API call is no good. I've done it all the time. So I would say if you're really interested in learning Google Cloud, play with the APIs. The book that Jay showed you is a tour through Google Cloud. You can find it at gcpinaction.com. And so dig around in there. If you're interested in the API design aspect of things, because as we're building applications, we have to actually build an API for front ends or our customers to use. Check out AIP.dev, which has really good descriptive rules about how APIs should be designed. I'm also working on another book called API Design Patterns, which is focused on explaining how all of these API rules that we set out on AIP.dev actually work and how we're trying to make them continue to be great. And so that book it's called API Design Patterns. It's at apidesignbook.com if you're interested in that.
Great. JJ, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so today we have a fantastic session set up for you around application development on GCP. Again, our hashtag is hashtag Google Cloud On Board. Please use it on social. There's a Q&A button. Please use that. Give us some feedback, ask questions, answer questions, and most importantly, be involved in this community that we have today. No matter where you're working from, you're certainly not alone. There are thousands of other people joining us online, and we're here to do this for you live in order to keep this conversation going. Your instructor today will be Henry Wu. So Henry is a customer engineer for SMB. He has a lot of experience with engineering, so he started out as an engineer. He loves working with technology, and today he's here to share his expertise with you. You can take a look at the home button. It'll give you the agenda for today. So we're going to start out with an introduction to application development. We are going to then talk about storage and monitoring, and then finally talk about containers, App Engine, and Cloud Run. Please ask questions. We have people standing by ready to assist. Thank you, and enjoy your session today.